working okay? Yep. All right.
How are you? Okay, great.
Okay. Where are you going to be sat? On the front row there. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Are you? That was an interesting session, wasn't it?
Yeah, I kept
I
wanting to
didn't
feed
even
you a
know where
line.
to, I didn't even know
I kept
how
want-
to get in.
Yeah,
I mean, I thought
I
I'm
kept
gonna.
trying to decide whether to feed you a line
Yeah.
or not. But
It was yes.
it was a bit
Yeah.
random. But
It was a bit random,
it's
and
like, oh, we've got these 3 questions.
I'm thinking like I'm in such a different space.
Yeah, I know. I can sort of see you weren't quite sure where to leap in.
Yeah.
Because
Good times.
I don't quite know quite how, what they thought they were going to get out.
No.
It was a bit funny.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
anyway, this is what we're here for.
What I might do is put mine up on here so we can find and then see this one.
Oh, yeah. That's a very good idea. Except you've got an old version, so let me give you the. Water. So I was just going to get my water.
Is John McCauley here? Not yet. You guys are here, so we'll get started on time and we'll see what happens after that. Welcome, everyone. I'm Laurie Lockyer, and I'm the chair, or really the timekeeper for this session. There's a number of seats near the front, so for all of you who are along the back wall, please feel free to move forward so that you can engage with our speakers. We're going to get going right away. Simon and Ruth are here to start this session off, and so I'll give way to them, and we'll have time for questions in the end.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, you know who I am. I'm Simon, introducing Ruth Deacon Crick, also from the UK. And we're going to talk to you about how it's possible for learning analytics to get to grips with quite a tough concept, which is the sort of attitudes and dispositions and values that learners bring to their learning. I'm going to give you a heads-up warning that we're going to do an interactive live Twitter crowdsourcing experiment halfway through. So get your machines out, tune to the hash LAK12 channel, because we're going to invite some input from you for a very rapid session. Okay, here's the outline. In one slide, in case your lunch is starting to kick in, message number one, learning dispositions really do matter when we're talking about learner engagement, and we'll be saying a bit about that. It is possible to model these in a computationally formal way, which of course is the key requirement for learning analytics. And we're modeling it as a multidimensional construct called learning power, which Ruth's been developing for the last decade or so. But it also connects to the world of analytics now because there's a platform that hosts these apps, and it pools data from all over the world from learners, generates real-time analytics, manages permissions for different stakeholders, and supports deeper kinds of research analytics as well. We're going to talk about the criteria for validating this kind of work, but we think arguably criteria for validating learning analytics more broadly. What does it mean to validate analytics? And it depends on who we're talking about and what the purposes and context are. And then we'll go through ongoing and future directions that this work is taking. Okay, so first of all, dispositions matter. A couple of quotes. John Dewey, that leading practitioner of learning analytics, wrote, "Knowledge of methods alone will not suffice. There must be the desire, the will to employ them. This desire is an affair of personal disposition." So as early as when he was working, he's thinking, what is it inside the learner, the intrinsic attitudes that they bring? Without that, we're preaching on deaf ears. From Bauman, the philosopher, this is a slightly more challenging quote. "Educational philosophy and theory face the unfamiliar and challenging task of theorizing a formative process which is not guided from the start by the target form designed in advance." Okay, so what that means is that we are used to deciding what the learning outcome will be, and then we define your trajectory to get there. And in the new paradigm for learning that we're having to get to grips with in a very complex, uncertain world, we're trying to create learners who don't necessarily know what the end result's got to be, or they're going to have to navigate very choppy, turbulent waters to get there and use a lot of internal resources to get there. And some of the most exciting pedagogies in schools and universities are inquiry forms of learning, where actually the teacher or the educator doesn't know what the outcome's going to be, because the student, the learner, is owning it themselves. What does it mean to design for that? Why do dispositions matter? Because there are some really scary figures now about the levels of disengagement in the developed countries' education systems. Okay, we just flashed a couple up here about disengagement in secondary school level from Canada, from England, from the US. That's in universities, US as well. People are just switching off. They're coming into school, they're coming into college, and they are not being engaged, right? Why that is a complex story, but we've got a serious problem. And the 21st century competencies, and there are various kinds of lists of what these are, these reflect the urgent need to build learners who've got the capacity to cope with unprecedented levels of uncertainty and challenge. And here are some of the buzzwords up there. I'm not going to go through each of them, but a lot of these are to do with people who are able to dig within themselves, to be resilient when challenged, etc., and to be creative and work around the traditional boundaries. Team working, problem solving, thinking about how they learn as learners and improving that themselves. Read John Seeley Brown and The New Culture of Learning for a great, very readable introduction to why passion is one of the key things for the 21st century paradigm for learning. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Ruth now, who's going to introduce this notion of disposition a little more carefully.
Using the term disposition in quite a general way, its dictionary meaning is a relatively enduring tendency to behave in a certain way. So we're looking at how people typically behave. But we know that dispositions don't come out of thin air. They're linked importantly to identity, to affect, to what happens inside a person and what happens in the culture within which a person belongs, their home culture, and also what goes on in the classroom and the sort of pedagogical technologies that shape what is possible and what isn't possible. And we're particularly focusing on dispositions, how they can change, and how we can support learners in developing dispositions which actually enable them to engage with learning opportunities where the target form isn't known in advance. How can we create effective, intentional, lifelong learners who can self-regulate their processes of learning? A couple of pieces of background. There are two key processes, I think, that we're dealing with here. One has to do with knowledge, and that's the vertical axis here on this knowledge agency window. The sequencing of somebody's encounter with knowledge or information is critically important, and traditionally the knowledge is pre-packaged by experts, and our national curricula package knowledge up in certain ways, and good teachers know how to get that knowledge into the kids in the most effective way possible. At the other end of the spectrum, there's the process of knowledge generation and use, where a learner defines their purpose, identifies the resources they need, harnesses them, and generates new knowledge which is useful in an authentic context. So that provides the vertical axis. And linked to that, along the bottom, has to do with agency. Who's in control here? So at this end of the spectrum, the teacher tells the student what to do, what to learn, how to learn it, and when to perform. And that's a fairly traditional approach to pedagogy. At the other end of that spectrum, the student is able to take responsibility for their own learning process over time. And what we want to do is understand how to operate in that top right quadrant, where authenticity, agency, and identity are important learning resources, and teaching is learning design rather than performing to a script. And it's not that the transmission approach to knowledge is not important. There are some things that should be taught like that, but actually we need to be able to move seamlessly between these windows, and I think our learning analytics needs to be able to do the same. Another important concept is that learning is complex. It's a complex dynamic process that involves internal processes and external processes. And there are at least 4 stations on a learning journey that are critically important. Identity, linked to who I am, story, desire, motivation, and relationships. If we don't attend to that in our learning, then we are missing out on something quite important. The next layer is learning power, and within that layer we position dispositions, the personal qualities that you need to engage with a learning opportunity. Then we have what we more traditionally understand as curriculum, the knowledge, skills and understanding, which in the UK are very carefully defined. And finally we have competence, how to use all the above in a real-world context. And our learning design and learning analytics needs to be able to take all of these aspects of learning into account. So learning power is a term has become used in practice to define clusters of dispositions, values and attitudes that enable people to engage with learning opportunities. And if you like metaphors, this is a metaphor of DNA. When we're teaching, 2 things are happening. We're focusing on the knowledge, skills and understanding that are the focus of the learning, and we're also teaching people to love or to hate that learning. So we're promoting values, attitudes and dispositions towards learning. And learning power or learning dispositions is what holds the 2 strands of the double helix together. So the research that we began in 2000, before I'd ever heard of the word learning analytics was twofold. Firstly, in a traditional social science way, could we identify the qualities and characteristics of people who are effective learners? And we went through a pretty standard research process, drawing on experts, a meta-analysis of literature, and specifically practitioners, to create a survey question, which then went through several iterative factor analytic processes, which resulted firstly with 2,000 cases, and that resulted in 7 key qualities or factors, which we subsequently identified as learning power. And this is where we're going to do the Twitter thing. So I'm going to hand over to Simon.
Okay, fine. So before we tell you the answer, we're going to ask you to think about the qualities of the most effective learners that you've ever had the joy and privilege of trying to teach. Okay? Not necessarily the high-flying academic ones that always got the A's, okay? But the ones who were engaged, who seemed to have skill and ability to progress, and they went on to do very well in real-world, authentic contexts, okay? And we're just going to invite you to go into Twitter now and tweet in some of the key qualities that make for the most effective learners in your experience, okay? So we've got like 15 seconds. Go to Twitter, think about what characterizes these kinds of people, and we'll take a look at what that looks like. So I'm just going to refresh that page, and we'll see what comes up. Okay, we've done this a few times. Sorry, Brandon says tenacity. Just going to keep refreshing this. I've done this in a couple of webinars with EduCause, and it works quite well. Actually, if I go into... okay, here we go. Motivation, focused questioning. They take the initiative. They don't wait to be handed. Engagement, persistence, enthusiasm. It's flooding in. I can't keep up. Okay, so passion, curiosity, self-awareness. They're excited by learning. They're persistent. Okay, self-motivation, a willingness to experiment. Okay, that's what we're talking about. All right, so you know this stuff. The question is, how do we do that with learning analytics? Okay, back to Ruth.
Okay, so I think good social science always makes common sense to people, and you just demonstrated that once again. What emerged from our studies and now has been replicated with over 50,000 cases are these 7 qualities which have an emergent pole and a contrast pole. So we want to move from being stuck and static to being hopeful about our ability to change and learn. I'm going to go through them one by one in just a minute. A couple of points about them. They are dispositions, but they include feeling and thinking. They're not learning styles, okay? And in actual fact, fragility and dependence is what emerged out of the data. That's what we actually measure, but we don't tell people how fragile and dependent they are. We actually work with the other end of the scale, which is resilience. So there are the 7 dimensions of learning power. Resilience is about tenacity, sticking with a problem, knowing that you can repair your mood if you have a challenge, if you need to, managing the feelings of learning, and so on. Strategic awareness is about metacognition, thinking about learning, but also managing the feelings of learning, knowing that if you stick with confusion, then that's probably a good thing because eventually you'll learn and you manage that process. Critical curiosity is what it sounds like. Effective learners don't make quiet classes. They challenge. They want to get beneath the surface. They generate lots of questions. Creativity is a general notion of creativity which has to do with playfulness, imagination and intuition, and basically thinking outside of the box. And we know that creativity is the worst casualty in all of our data. It plummets as children go through school, funnily enough. Meaning-making is the opposite of just accumulating data. It's about making sense of data, not only 2 bits of data to make something new, but learning that matters to me in my story and in my community. Changing and learning is about hopefulness and a Dweckian concept of hope and optimism that I can engage with new learning opportunities, as opposed to thinking, well, I'm just a level 5 and that's all I'm ever going to be, which is stuck and static. And finally, learning relationships. Positive learning relationships are when you're able to be both interdependent and independent, rather than either dependent or isolated. So we have these 7 dimensions of learning power. And is this me or you, Simon, at this point?
Me.
So this is where Simon does the next bit.
Okay, this is where Simon does the next bit. Okay, so a well-grounded notion of where, of how one might conceptualize this collection of attitudes and dispositions. How would one gather this stuff at scale and generate feedback in a timely way? And this is a platform called the Learning Warehouse. It's got a whole bunch of data sets in it, around about 40 to 50,000 actually, coming up to 50 perhaps, different LE profiles from students and learners all over the world, school and adults. There are other apps hosted on the Learning Warehouse other than just LE, the tool for gathering this data. The ability to generate reports, we'll show you what they look like in a minute, as well as to support researchers who are digging more deeply using a researcher interface. And then, of course, there's a user experience at the front end, and depending on who you are as a user, you get different views. So what you do is, through self-report, answer a questionnaire, a sort of web quiz. And you can see, for example, here, talking things through with my colleagues helps me to learn. No, not at all like me, a little bit like me, quite a lot, or very much like me. Okay? So you go through and you think about your learning and answer the questions. What you get back is a 7-legged spider diagram, which gives you in sort of blue shaded outline. And that's then the basis of a mentored discussion with somebody who understands what these things mean, about what that might mean. Do you feel that you own this? Okay? Because if the learner doesn't own it, then we need to think about what that might mean. And then what interventions might we make off the back of that. The red line shows the result after doing some work for one of these particular learners. Okay? And you can imagine if you've got a very scrunched up profile, that could be quite crushing. Right? So we don't just give these to the students and wish them good luck. It's very important about educator support and scaffolding. Although the notion of peer mentoring around this is quite an interesting one for scaling this up. And you get cohort data, so a teacher gets to see their class. And even the high achievers might actually be very brittle and not very good when challenged and stretched out of their comfort zone. And you can kind of view that in different ways. Okay? So it sort of informs organizational and leadership strategic change. So we're talking about learners who do the profile, administrators who can upload additional metadata about the students, the learners, educators and leaders who are trying to sense what are the implications of this, either for my school, my class, my organization. This is starting to be used in the workplace as well. And researchers who, with the right permissions, can come in and do cross-data set analyses, compare it with other data sets, etc. And there's a social enterprise spun out to then service this. So doing bespoke organizational analyses, analysis of data across a particular cohort of organizations, like a network who are all working, experimenting with new pedagogies, the Learning Futures Network in England. There's a collaborative data analysis service, and then you can do secondary analysis and say, is there any correspondence or correlation between what I'm seeing in learning power and other indices of attainment? Okay. Right. Moving swiftly on, what does it mean to validate this?
So one of the challenges that I've struggled with really for 12 years has been using the same data set for different purposes and thereby transgressing just about all boundaries in my discipline of education because there are different truth paradigms or quality criteria for the different ways in which we use data. So, for example, the large data sets that we analyse in social science, and I guess this applies to you in learning analytics as well, what really matters is empirical analytical quality criteria. when we've identified the learning power profiles of underachieving students, we want to know whether the analyses that we've done are replicable across the whole population. Can we generalise from this traditional scientific approaches to the data? And we've been able to do quite a lot. We now know quite a lot about learning power and how it operates, at least in the UK and several other countries. The second sort of level of use of the data is hermeneutical, interpreting the data. And that has a different set of quality criteria. So how somebody interprets, how a teacher interprets what this class cohort set of profiles means is an act of interpretation. There's not necessarily a single right answer. We can't say with absolute certainty it is this. And the person with authority to make that judgment is different from those that make authority judgments in traditional social science. And then finally, the spider diagram is a framework for a coaching conversation that moves between the identity of the learner and their purpose in learning. And that's emancipatory rationality. The purpose there is to enable a person to flourish and reach their full potential. So these are three significantly different forms of rationality based on Habermas, in case any of you recognise that, which we have to work with. And working with these different forms of truth criteria is challenging. So empirical analytical criteria, it's reliability, validity, and there are all sorts of different forms of validity that you probably know very well about. Hermeneutical criteria, however, reliability and validity is replaced with trustworthiness. In the light of all the evidence, do we find this to be a trustworthy judgment that we're making about why our year nines are so disengaged? Okay? And then when it comes to emancipatory rationality, it's very different again. It's about who's speaking for whom, attention to voice, critical reflexivity, undistorted communication. And I think this challenge of dealing with different truth claims has always been a challenge with the LE work, and I suspect it's a challenge for learning analytics as well, because it's so intensely pragmatic.
Okay, so where are we going next with this? As you've heard, this is working off data about how learners see themselves. Okay? That LE profile is how I see myself. I don't see myself as very creative, or I do see myself as quite resilient. Okay? What we're trying to do with Learning Warehouse 3, for want of a better name at the moment, is add data streams as well as data sets gained through fairly traditional educational social science paradigms. Okay? Data streams coming in from live social learning applications. I'll just add the whole layer there. Okay? So we've got new kinds of apps at the top here, which are going to generate new kinds of analytics, possibly open up the possibility for recommendation engines to act the kinds of things that we're interested in here in the learning analytics world. Using simulations as well, based on notions of learning power and how good practice spreads. Okay. Collective intelligence we've put in there as well, because we're bringing technologies in from the work that I do, which allows a community of practice to share what they're doing with this kind of approach in more sort of powerful ways than simply on traditional network forums and so forth. So this is the sort of ecosystem we're trying to create now as we take this work forward. So very quickly then, a blogging platform, WordPress, but we've added some plugins. There's this one specifically around LE, so that when the learner is blogging as in Inquiry Blogger about their learning journey, they're actually categorizing it as, I think I'm exercising resilience here. I'm demonstrating critical curiosity. You can see a mood view there, which just says, my mood is plummeted on this project right now. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? The question is, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to pieces now, or have you got resources where you know what to do when you don't know what to do? And there's the educator dashboard that gives you the Gestalt collective view. We've got a tool for mentoring at scale that's being prototyped called Element, where the learner and the mentor can look at the diagram and reflect on what's going on in text chat, or you can open up a Skype window as well, of course, talk about it, agree an intervention, and then revisit that later on. Social Learn is a platform just rolling out within the OU at the moment and shortly to the world. Similar in flavour to the landing, I think, for those of you who heard John Dron's presentation. And we're trying to define analytics in Social Learn, which, rather than just saying what I think I'm doing, what kind of LE profile could a platform generate from what I actually do? So that's work in progress at the moment, but we're trying to define what would a sign of resilience be? What would a sign of critical curiosity be? And then even more interesting but tough, could we actually formalize what our mentor does into some code rules? Ethical and all sorts of problems there. So we'll stop there. Learningemergence.net is the place to come if you're interested in taking this discussion forward, and very happy to take a couple of questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Are we on? Hi. This is wonderful stuff. One of the things that I'm always concerned with students working at a distance and coming at learning from all kinds of different backgrounds is their use of time, their constructive use of time. And I'm just wondering if you've got any field test data yet with actual students and whether they find this is a meaningful use of their time, or whether they find it's much too distracting and just takes them away from the tasks at hand.
The way LE is mostly used is a combination of the learning analytics and the face-to-face. And when it's skillfully used, then the analytics that come from LE enable are focused on a particular purpose. And so I think they focus a person's time and provide scaffolding for the journey to a product. And that's the whole purpose of the Learning Power profile. With adults, we've worked with 14 British universities, and I think the same thing applies, that because it provides a scaffolding, it actually enables focus. So when people might normally just give up, they can say, look at their, if it's a child, look at their spider diagram and say, well, actually, I need to use my creativity here. How many different things could I think of to do to get myself away from this stuck point? So used skillfully, I think it's a time saver. Used unskillfully, it's disastrous like any other pedagogical tool.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the interpretation aspect? I was interested in what this means in terms of a teacher interpreting the spider diagrams or the other elements that are presented to them and what they do with that.
We've always maintained from the beginning that the person who has the authority to validate an individual spider diagram is the learner themselves, because at the end of the day, when we're using large numbers and you've got mean scores across large populations, you can be confident about what you're saying in that context. But when it comes to an individual, it's actually an act of interpretation. So you don't know whether mum and dad broke up last night. That's why when they came to do their profile, it was a really wrinkly prune all stuck in the middle. And so therefore there is an act of, so the analytic is one bit of data that a skilled teacher as learning designer takes into account in making an interpretation.
A couple of thoughts on that. I mean, we've had quite, so if we think about how we're going to implement this as a model that could underpin analytics, that creates some interesting challenges for us, right? Because it means that the platform may or may not be able to make good decisions about what to recommend to me. So one of the really interesting questions right now that we're wrestling with is, what's the relationship between a profile that's from self-report versus one that's from behavioral data by the traces I leave behind in the platform? It might be that they're not actually quite the same, but what would that mean? That would be interesting. It might mean that I don't think of myself like this, but the platform thinks actually I'm demonstrating that ability. Or it might be that the platform's just confused, of course. And then the whole mentoring and interpretation thing, should we basically depend on human mentors or can we do peer mentoring and buddying, which of course would scale very nicely in a social kind of platform. It's the whole ecosystem about what a representation like this means to a machine and what it might mean to a human as well.
Oh, can I ask a question? So I want to know what you know right now about using it skillfully. You talked about how it's very useful when used skillfully, but what's that mean?
You mean what are the components of being skillful as a practitioner?
Skillful in using this profile to help somebody become a better learner.
Well, I suppose in a nutshell, it would be teachers who see, or facilitators who see teaching as learning design rather than following a script. So rather than, here's the curriculum, and we've got to get it into the kids, and it's actually a transmission process. It's about saying, here's a context, here's a purpose, these are the objectives, and the teacher needs to use all of that data in order to make pedagogical judgments and use their professional discernment in the process of teaching, rather than simply...
That's what I'm asking. I'm asking about what that means. I mean, you're at this way high level. Oh, yeah, people who know how to do that. But what's it mean to know how to do that?
For a teacher?
Yeah, for anybody. I mean, what do we know about that? What do we know about promoting disposition and about doing that skillfully?
Okay, so we know that the quality of relationships is absolutely critical to a conversation with somebody about their learning power. The quality of trust, which we don't, is hard to measure, but everybody knows whether it's there or not, is a critical quality of a pedagogical relationship if that conversation needs to happen. We know that learning power contributes to knowledge structuring processes quite critically in terms of inquiry-based learning.
I think we should probably stop for time.
Yeah.
But
We've run a little bit over time. I think that's probably a presentation in itself.
Yes,
So
it is.
we can probably
Yeah.
have a conversation about
Yeah.
that later. Thank you, everyone.
sorry. Do you need sound?
No. God. Yeah? Oh, that'd be great, actually. Yeah.
Okay, John McCauley is here to present to us exploring reflection in online communities.
Hello, everybody. How are we? My name is John McCauley. I'm from Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland. And my research is a little bit different from what a lot of work has been presented at LAK. I'm specifically interested in online communities, but how online communities learn. So how they learn to adapt to change, what we could consider as organisational learning. So key to organisational learning is this idea of reflection in a shared context. It's how people learn to manage the system, manage the community as it begins to develop over time. So just a brief overview. I'll firstly give a little bit of background. I'll describe the problem, flesh it out a little bit. Then I'll describe our research question and some objectives that we outlined to address this research question. I'll briefly touch on related work, just to expand on it a little bit. Then I'll describe the tool. It's a visual analytic tool that I developed. It's called explore.su. And we developed to essentially explore the process of reflection in the super user online community. Then I'll describe the evaluation, how we evaluated this, and present the results, and then discuss some future work, which is really current work. So background. Online communities now make stuff. They're no longer just places where people get together and have discussion, a lot for like-minded people to engage in discussion, as was kind of originally put forth by Howard Rheingold in 1999, the virtual community. Now online communities contribute to the creation of media and software artifacts, and this is on a large scale. Linux, Wikipedia, Superuser, Local Motors, all example of communities where they come together and create things. Linux, for example, is a huge operating system that was began in 1992 by a loosely coupled group of developers and has since gone on to challenge Microsoft in both the server and desktop markets. Wikipedia needs no introduction, I'd imagine. Started in 2001 by Larry Sanger and Jimmy Wales. Very small investment, very simple technical tool, and it's developed into the world's leading encyclopedia. I know people have different opinions about that. Superuser is part of a new collection of online communities, which are question-answer communities. It's part of a network of communities called the Stack Exchange Network. And what's interesting about this community is it drew a lot from Wikipedia, it drew a lot of the social media innovations and brought it into the question-answer process. And finally, Local Motors is another interesting type of online community because it uses, it's not really an online community, but it uses an online community to bootstrap the manufacturing of cars in America. So what all these communities have in common is what was described by Benkler in 2002 as commons-based peer production. Interaction is generally computer mediated. They share a lot of common characteristics. So interaction across this community is computer mediated. They're large scale, distributed, network based and fluid. They don't have the same management hierarchies that exist in traditional bricks and mortar organizations. They share a common purpose, which is governed by informal norms and formal policies. But this, when I say they're governed, I don't mean that there's a kind of intent towards authority. There's a framework put in place that allows relationships to develop between autonomous individuals. Participation is voluntary and reward is non-monetary, but they are subject to continuous change. They're evolving systems that are constantly changing. And as a consequence, they're prone to a lot of threats and a lot of vulnerabilities. For example, vandalism is a constant problem in Wikipedia. They can have sudden drops in contribution rates. They can have a sudden influx of new users, which will take the idea of a very small hamlet-like community and turn it into this kind of huge conglomeration. They often have intricate and unwritten cultural policies in place, which can serve to inhibit the enculturation of new users and result in a decrease in contribution rates. And also technical change that can be not well understood can be implemented in one of these communities, and that can have a dire social consequence. So how do these communities currently learn? A lot of online communities, a lot of these commons-based peer production hive off a little section of their community is where they discuss community matters. It's where reflection takes place. It's where they get together and they say, okay, what's going on, how do we feel about this, and how to make changes to the community infrastructure, both socio and technical changes. However, this is currently based on experiential knowledge. People experience something, they intuit it, then they go and they share it, it's integrated at a group level, and then it can be debated and discussed across these computer-mediated communication channels, and then this has risen to an institutional level and can result in the implementation of a new policy. So we got this, what we have is essentially an experiential-based approach to how the community learns. There's little objective analysis. There's no data-driven or evidence-based learning, and this is prone to the same problems of any kind of human interpretation. There can be problems around power relations or just badly thought out policy decisions based on experience. However, at the same time, all the activity in every online community is stored for perpetuity, basically. And now it's public, in many communities, public available. So how can we kind of use the huge wealth of knowledge that we have in some of these communities and provide visualization tools, provide analytic tools, can move the learning process, the organizational learning process, from an experiential-based approach to one that is based on objective analysis? So that's my research question. To what extent can visual analytics support the reflection in online communities? Sorry, I'll just So to address this research question, we identified a number of objectives. Firstly, we wanted to build a visual analytics tool that provided access to the social and temporal patterns of an online community. This also provided access to the different user actions that are in an online community. We also wanted to embed this visual analytics tool into a collaborative architecture so that not only could users reflect on the actual activity of their group, but they could also annotate, bookmark, and comment on this activity. And then finally, we wanted to evaluate this system. We want to evaluate for the ability of a visual analytics tool to support reflection in an online community. And we aspire to do this in a real-world evaluation with a large 50,000 user online community called superuser.com. So I'll just briefly go through the related work section to give a kind of an idea of some of the approaches there are to visualizing online communities and the approaches that we took when we were building our visual analytics tool. So there's a lot of work now in visualizing online communities. It's a very hot topic. It kind of started out, there's two basic approaches. You can visualize the activity of a community, or you can visualize the connections between the community. Visualizing the activity, for example, are some of the current visualizations here. We've got People Garden, where users are represented as flowers, and then very busy communities look like blooming and active gardens. Then we've got a chromogram visualization down here on the left, which visualizes the editor activity of different editors in Wikipedia. So very quickly you can compare and contrast how people are behaving in this community. Up on the right we have a kind of an advanced scatter plot visualization, which will cluster user activity based on their contribution rates to the community. So again, we can see very quickly how people contribute to the community. How do they behave? What is their contribution to the actual community? Then the other approach is based on connections. And this is where we kind of look at the connections between different communities, and this is very important in social network visualization. There's two main approaches to visualizing, to using social network visualization. One is the graph-based approach, and the second is the matrix. The graph-based approach is a lot more familiar and has become very popular on the web, but has problems with very large networks. It also doesn't render change very well. So if you're trying to look at a network change over time, a graph-based approach isn't a good approach to take. A matrix, on the other hand, can render very large networks with a lot more readability. And also, you can, because each node is assigned a place in space, managing change in this network is a lot easier to do. At the same time, there's a lot of work done around the idea of social data analysis. This is where we take some analytics tools and we provide them into the hands of the community. We democratize the analytic process. So this was started by a guy called Mark Wattenberg in 2003, where he developed a very simple visualization called Name Voyager, which helped people to decide baby names and published it on the web. It had 1 million hits and had a huge response. And he realized that these kind of tools, people are interested in. People want to use these kind of tools to understand the data. People want to share these kind of tools, and people want to make use of them together. So this kind of led to the development of Many Eyes, which a lot of people might be familiar with, where you can upload your data set and share it with your friends or share it with other people in the community, and then collectively analyze and interpret that data set. Then later work again by the same group was by Jeff here on his PhD, which was called Sense.us, where they collectively analysed, they built a visualization and a collaborative visualization environment where they could collectively analyse the US Census data. And what they took was a lot of the more simple tools that had been developed in Many Eyes and applied a lot more advanced analytic techniques. So you could point, and you could point within the visualization, you could bookmark a visualization, you could chain together different approaches to reasoning and use that to form an argument within the whole visualization environment. So we drew from both of these approaches. We drew from how we currently represent online communities, how we currently visualize online communities, and also how people are providing these sort of tools for communities to analyze data. And we developed Explore.su. Explore.su was developed we used the superuser.com online community. There's a question and answer community which is over 50,000 users. It's for enthusiasts of computer hardware and computer software. And what's interesting about this community is, as I said, it's drawn from a lot of the innovations that started out in Wikipedia. So it's collaboratively edited. It's not just people submit answers, people also revise posts and constantly revise and change posts. It's got what's called gamification, which is how people are awarded or attributed reputation for if they behave in a pro-social way in the community. So you can develop a very high reputation model within this community, and that can actually lead to jobs and can lead to contracts within the computer industry. And what's even more interesting in regards to my research is they have this idea of a meta site. And a meta site is a place where people come together and they can talk about the actual community. So it's a place where community discuss community matters. And this is where the reflection will take place. This idea started out as the Wikipedia Village Pump, where we hive off a little area of the community, and it's where people go to discuss and analyse how the actual community is performing. So with Explore.su, we aimed to provide access to the social and temporal patterns in the community. We used a matrix-based visualization, and we represented 4 different user actions. So we could see the revision patterns in the community, we could see the question-answer patterns in the community, we could see the commenting patterns in the community, and we could see accepted answers in the community. We also provide a timeline which would let you update the matrix, would let the user update the matrix dynamically. We have annotation and collaboration tools, so people could point out points of interest or highlight points of interest, draw on the visualization, and then they could attach this visualization as a bookmark and bring it into the discussion, bring it into that moment of that point of reflection. And then, of course, there was threaded discussion list on the right. So how do we evaluate Explore.su? Evaluating visualization is quite difficult. Visual analytics applications are very difficult also because you've got the added need to evaluate the analytic process, the sense making. But we also wanted to evaluate the ability of these kind of visualizations to promote discussion, to promote reflection in online communities, to make people actually think, oh, okay, is this how we're behaving? Is this something that we want to address? So we followed Jeff Here's approach to social data analysis and performed a 2-stage evaluation. Now, we did this completely in the wild as well. Well, not the initial one, but the second one we did completely in the wild. And the environment is, as I said, web-based. So we conducted first was an initial pilot study with members of the lab, members from the lab. And we just wanted to find out, was the visualization environment itself generally comprehensible? Did it make sense? Was it intuitive? Was there any glaring usability issues which we hadn't thought out? Everyone seemed happy enough. There was some issues around providing better access, providing more information at certain points, and providing better drill-down mechanisms. So we took that information and we set it about and built a second iteration of the product. And then we conducted a 2-week exploratory user study with the superuser.com online community. We contacted the moderators. We told them what we were doing. We asked them would they be interested in it. They thought it was a great idea, so they placed an advert on the community, and it was sticky for They said they placed it up for sticky for 2 weeks, and then 2 interesting things happened. Firstly, each of these communities seem to have their own chat room, and a lot of moderators hang out there and they talk and they chill out and they discuss different aspects of the community. And what happened was once it was advertised, the moderators went and took screenshots from the visualization and brought it into the chat room and discussed it there. So they didn't bother going to the tool. They weren't particularly that interested, but they were interested in the idea, and it sparked off some debate about how revision is organised in the community. Are people with too low a reputation not being encouraged to do enough revision in the community? So immediately for us there was a certain amount of validation for the approach, and I found that we're going to have these kind of, when you're conducting an evaluation in this way, you're going to have these kind of serendipitous things happen, I suppose. But then also what happened was the advert was taken down after 2 weeks, so about 24 hours. So 28 people signed in, 17 people completed the evaluation, but we only ended up with 17. Out of the 17, they were asked to sign in. They were presented with a video tutorial. They were asked to familiarise themselves with the visualization, and then they were asked to submit a number of comments based on their understanding of the activity in the visualizations. After that, they were presented with 2 questionnaires, one which was just a general impressions questionnaire, and the second was a simple usability survey, which allowed us to assess the usability of the entire system. Results. Having gathered all the comments from after a 2-week period, we gathered all the comments. It was about 60 comments in all, and we conducted a content analysis across the comments. We used the coding scheme that was developed by Hare for his previous work on social data analysis. And out of that, they had 11 different categories that they had identified. Out of those 11, we found that there was only 7 that were actually pertinent to the comments that we used. We used the 2 coders to codify up the comments, and we had an inter-rater reliability of 0.77. So out of the different comments, we found that the majority of them were just observational. People just suggested, oh, look at this, such and such is happening in the community. Oh, look, there's the majority of people with a high reputation revise a lot, the majority of people with a low reputation. Or I noticed that on Sundays, some people said that there's not a lot of people on the community, but that's because a lot of people are at work when they're in these sorts of communities. However, some people did spark off more interesting debate. For instance, someone said a lot of the activity happens at certain levels of reputation, or that I would suggest that the glove activity is posted because there's posts being migrated from other types of community in the Stack Exchange network. And also, while a lot of new users aren't revising older users' posts, they theoretically can, and maybe this is something we want to look at. So what we learned from this approach. Our actual visualization we found had limited insight. It was we took a certain approach to how we visualized the community, and because of that approach, people found that it actually only provided an overview of the community. It didn't allow people to get into the data and actually feel that this data was, that they could actually explore the data more, that they could understand the data more. Also, we found that who cares about these types of visualization? Who cares about these in online communities? I had a kind of a very a kind of summer 68 view of online communities, that a lot of people want to find out what's going on, a lot of people are interested, but in reality contribution rates in online communities kind of follow a very defined and well established pattern. Some people describe it as a power law, but 1%, 10%, 20% of people in online communities contribute to the vast majority of content. So all the rest, the long tail of the community, the majority of them are only there for information seeking or information providing purposes. The majority of them actually only there to find out their answer to an actual problem. So while these kind of large peer-based networks have in theory that everybody can contribute and everybody's helping towards a unified goal, in reality there's only a very small number of people actually interested in the development and the movement of the community into a certain direction. And this is reflected even if you did a statistical analysis of the actual meta sites. You'll find that in comparison to the amount of people that contribute to the community overall, only a very small amount of people actually contribute to how the community is governed and how the community learns as an actual organisation. And finally, the system's too complex for a single evaluation strategy. So as opposed to kind of taking this computer science-based approach, which would be develop an actual system, go to the literature, develop a system, and then evaluate it with the community. I found that visual analytics applications, and this is more broadly, and any time that a visual analytics application is being applied, has too many points of failure. Essentially, requirements are needed. There needs to be an appropriate algorithm design. The approach to visualization needs to convey the information appropriately, and also that has to be considered in the context of how it's going to be used. And finally, the interactivity. These aren't pictures, these need to be interactive visualizations, and so the interactivity has to aid the actual analysis process. So a better approach is to target each one of these different stages and then present the whole approach as a case study, and then conduct an evaluation with the community at the end to establish how much that approach to visualization has promoted reflection in the community. So future work, which is more like current work. Having done this, I went away and came back and said, okay, I want to develop an approach that's more useful, essentially, which is good, provides the community with more insight, but also cans the approach to analysis in a certain way that the users find it usable. So I'm currently working with the semantic online communities. They have a wide range of communities, question-answer communities again, that they're interested in developing these sort of models that can support organizational learning within the community. Mm-hmm. However, as opposed to working on very specific, as opposed to building a complete model, I'm looking at very specific use cases of how we can apply simple visual analytic tools to identify specific issues within communities and how that can be used to help and promote areas of reflection. This must be integrated into the everyday workflow of the community. It can't just be something that people, if it's something that's going to be proven to be successful, it can't just be something that's analysed now and again, but actually has to be shareable and referenceable within the actual community infrastructure. It has to support historical analysis and temporal analysis. And finally, I'm in the process of conducting a case study, as I said, with the semantic online communities. Questions? It was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I hope it was okay.
Okay, I think he's going to say, first of all, is I was surprised that you said that graphs are good for large networks to use matrices, because matrices are n squared to represent, and graphs can represent. I can't load in my graph into matrix software.
Yeah, well, it depends, of course, how big your community is. In this, I used reputation to kind of abstract up how the community is represented. Okay. So I broke the community down into blocks of matrix and into blocks of reputation, and then used the matrix to represent that.
You use a coarser representation.
Yeah, yeah, it's a much coarser representation.
You said that graphs aren't good for analyzing over time, but this is what I thought you were going to say. There's this foresight graph layout approach where you foresight which nodes are going to come in the future, and then you keep them fixed in their position.
Yeah.
Just for your information, you may want to look into that. But the real thing I want to ask you is, well, concerning your results, I mean, what did you expect? Because I didn't see you say anything about what you said. The purpose of the visualization basically was to expose patterns, but you didn't say what kind of patterns we're looking for, and you didn't say what purpose the users had in looking at the graphs. What were they trying to accomplish? So I think maybe if you can have more of an objective for the visualization, it might.
The objective of the visualization was just to expose the temporal and social aspects of the community. So allow the users to actually see how the community is functioning over time, and see how the relationships between the different sorts of user actions, the different types of user actions are visible within the community. For example, revision patterns are very visible in the community, and when you compare that to comment patterns, they're completely different distribution.
Yeah, I'm a little worried that we too often rely on the pretty visualization to say, okay, we're going to get something out of it. I realize that human visual system does great parallel processing and can discover things that we may not have found by pre-planned investigations. But on the other hand, maybe we rely on that too much.
No, okay. I think that's why the approach I'm taking now is a very use case specific approach to kind of identify issues which community managers might feel and community stakeholders actually feel that visualization can support, as opposed to taking this kind of one size fits all, which is what I originally kind of addressed. Hi.
Okay, for the comment that I want to make, can you go back to the future?
Yeah.
Work? Just the future.
Or back to the past.
Okay. No. I share with you the interest in these, as we say, productive online communities, and particularly for us, it's so suitable that they have all these data freely available. Very different from other communities that are more and more protected against downloads for these purposes. What I was surprised by was that you directly went to intervention. I think it would probably be worthwhile to use that as an analyst, first to see what you can get out of these visualizations. And that's why I said, if you go to future work, there are some issues that you could directly predict, so that you need the case studies, that you need the examples, the narratives that you can derive yourself from the data. I was really surprised, how can you directly go to intervention? That's quite courageous and maybe also a bit premature. Also, for instance, just a little detail, why did you use 24-hour time windows? I mean, what was the empirical basis for that?
Oh no, well, it can also be stretched. So I just have it marked. I just have 24-hour, but it could be stretched.
But I guess the whole complexity issue is suited to the 24-hour window, at least also how you presented it. And
yeah, sorry, but you can't. It can be stretched, so it could be stretched to different time periods. So
did you have an idea about the interesting time intervals on beforehand?
Not really, no, to be honest with you.
That would also be something that you could really investigate on beforehand from an analytic perspective. So my comment, my overall comment would be I really would do some analytic studies before I directly expose this information to the community.
I think that's pretty much what I learned from this, and taking a previous question also, that that's why I'm addressing this as specific use cases as opposed to this kind of one size fits all. Hey. Hiya. No problem.
Oh, yeah.
Now.
Just one more thing you need to do. Which one's duplicate?
This one.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah.
Here you go.
It's not connected. No. So the cable is not striped. It's not.
Sound? Are you playing anything? No. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, we're now moving to Veronica.
Yeah. So good afternoon. My name is Veronica Rivera Pelayo, and I'm working at the FZI Research Center for Information Technologies. And it's a pleasure for me to present you our work on applying quantified self approaches to support reflective learning. So first, a brief overview of my presentation. I will introduce you to the project where our work is carried on. What is the background of our work? So first, from a theoretical point of view, and then from a pragmatical point of view, the motivation of our work, and then I will present you the framework itself, so a framework to apply quantified self approaches to support reflective learning, and the 3 dimensions that are part of it: tracking cues, triggering, and recalling and revisiting experiences. And finally, the conclusions of our work. So as I said, I will start with Mirror, Reflective Learning at Work. This is a European project with 15 partners, and we are aiming to support learners at work, so learning on the job, and how they can learn by observing others and from their own experiences. So here, collected data has a main role, and they can learn by reflection on this data that we are collecting. And the last result of the project will be a bunch of applications which will be able to be personalized for the users, and they will interact so that, for example, a user can have an application to capture data and other applications to visualize data or to directly conduct a reflection session. So what's reflective learning in our work? There are several definitions of reflective learning. We have the reflexive model of Baud, Keogh, and Walker, and this is the definition we are having in our work. And it means, for us, reflective learning means returning to an evaluated past work and personal experience in order to promote continuous learning and improve future experiences. So why we choose this model? So, as I said, there are other models, but this model defines how the complex cognitive process takes place, so all the phases that are taking place, we can say, in our heads, and it's context independent. That means that we can use this model in any context that we would like to. Let's have a look at the model. So we have the base of reflective learning are the experiences themselves. So these experiences are made of behavior, ideas, and feelings, and they feed to the reflective process, just in the middle, which is formed of 3 phases. The first phase is returning to the experience. The second phase is attending to the feelings of this experience and utilizing positive feelings and removing the negative feelings. And finally, in a third phase, we reevaluate this experience in order to get a result, to get what we call an outcome. And an outcome of the reflection process could be a new perspective on experience, a change in behavior, or, for example, a commitment to action. So this was the theoretical background. Let's see now the practical, pragmatical background of our work. So the quantified self community, maybe some of you already know this community, is a group of users and tool makers who are using and developing all kinds of tools in order to collect personally relevant information. So this will allow them to gain self-knowledge about their experiences, their behaviors, their habits, and thoughts. So let's see 3 examples. The first one is MoodScope. It's a web-based application which allows users to track their mood through a game based on cards, so a card game. A second example would be Rescue Time, which tracks which applications we are using in our laptops and which websites we are visiting. So this way, they give you feedback about your productivity and your efficiency, and they compare you to the average users that are in this tool. And finally, a third example is Nike Plus. So a part of Nike Plus is a sensor that you can wear in your training shoes, and then you can count calories, kilometers, and so on. So it's oriented to sport and health. So with the combination of the reflective learning and quantified self tools, we concretize a vision of learning analytics for a particular model of informal learning and for a particular class of support tools. This way, we want to show too that learning analytics can be used beyond classrooms and in our daily lives. So quantified self tools, so this community, they are already being successful. They are already learning a lot about themselves. And then we have thought that these benefits could be used for learning processes too. Some of these benefits are, for example, a rich source of data, the awareness augmentation for the learners, the analysis of the data that these tools can make, and finally, quantification of abstract measures, for example, emotions. So let's have a look at the framework itself. So first we have this theory, this cognitive process, and secondly we have the quantified self, these tools that come from an experimentation of several users. Then we made a model analysis and we tried to research which information needs do this model have. And then by surveying several quantified self tools that are already available, we tried to see which support dimensions we could have for reflective learning. And we identified 3 dimensions. So we have the first dimension is tracking cues, the second dimension is triggering, and the third dimension is recalling and revisiting experiences. So let's see these 3 dimensions. The first one, tracking cues. Tracking cues means, on the one hand, tracking these experiences, so which aspects form an experience, these behavior, ideas, and feelings. And on the other hand, we can track the outcomes too. So these outcomes, these results of reflective process, can serve for future learning processes as a source of information, a source of experiences. And here, we define 3 aspects. First of all, how we are tracking this data. So this tracking means we can use software sensors. That's what we say they could be applications which are web-based, desktop-based, or mobile applications which allow users to track experiences which are not directly measurable. For example, in this MoodScope, where you can track your mood. And we have, as a second category, the hardware sensors, which are just devices which allow you to capture automatically any data. These are normally more expensive than the software sensors, and therefore a very different category of tracking means. In this example, we could see the Nike Plus. Then the core of the tracking cues is actually what we are tracking. So what is the tracked aspect and object? And here we define a categorization of 4 parts. So first of all, the emotional aspects. We can track mood, stress, interest. Secondly, data from private and work processes. For example, our browser history, our photos. In third place, we have the physiological data. We can track, for example, asthma attacks or heart rate. So any data, any aspect that has to do something to do with our health and with physical activity. And finally, general activity, where we can have from number of cigarettes till hours spent in a certain activity, for example, at work. And finally, the third aspect of tracking cues is the purpose. So which is the goal that the user is trying to achieve by tracking this data and using one of these tools. So the second dimension of the framework is triggering. So trigger means to start the reflective process itself. So normally this start takes place when there is a discrepancy between what we perceive from an experience, so what is our perception, and what actually really happened. And this mismatch can trigger reflective processes. Here, from the technical point of view of quantified self tools, we can define 2 kinds of triggering. First one is active triggering. In this case, there is the tool that makes a notification or catches the attention of the user by sending, for example, an email or doing something explicitly. This is the case of rescue time. They send you weekly an email and they tell you your efficiency was this X%, and the average user had this other percentage of efficiency or productivity. And we have a second category, which is the passive triggering. That means that the tool doesn't perform any analysis on the data in order to detect these experiences which they should prompt to you, but they just show you the data in an appropriate way so that the user can start this learning process. And usually, so this triggering takes place outside of the system itself. So this would be the case of Daytime. So Daytime is a web-based application where you can just introduce your data and it's visualized. In this example, you can see someone introduced how many times she had been in many cities, so London, Athens, Amsterdam, and then she could visualize the data. And there you can enter any data you want. And the third and final dimension, recalling and revisiting experiences. In this dimension, we aim to enrich and visualize the data as well as share it in order to form an experience and show it to the user in a more meaningful way. So here we have defined 4 sub-dimensions. The first one is contextualizing. So we can contextualize the data we are capturing with other data. For example, social context. So establishing relationships between our data and the data of others may be very meaningful for the user, or comparing ourselves with others. This is the case, once again, of rescue time, where you get this comparison with the other users. You can have a special context. So where were you when this data was captured? And this may give a meaning to the experience itself. Then we have historical context. For reflection, it's very important to see the trend of the data and the evolution of the data. And finally, we have item metadata and context from other data sets. Regarding item metadata, it could be, for example, if we track what we are eating, how many calories does a product have. Or in the context from other data sets, there are already many data sets available, and we could consider, for example, weather or work schedule. The other 3 dimensions of recalling and revisiting are in these slides. The second is data fusion. So this perspective that from the same experiences are very important to make them aware, so to make the user aware of these different perspectives. So here then we can consider the data fusion from an objective point of view. That would be the data that comes from a device, from a sensor, for example. Then the self-reported data, so data that the user has indicated. Then the peer fusion, this would be when we are comparing with, so we have a comparison between 2 individuals, or the group data, so the group perspective. We can aggregate the data and compare ourselves to the rest of the users. Then the data analysis. Here is the most important part maybe for learning analytics. Here we can consider aggregation, averages. Aggregation, it could be done from a formal point of view, for example, a tag cloud, from a mathematical point of view, or from a visualization point of view. And there I come to the last point of recalling and revisiting experiences, and it's the visualization, which has a main role because with these visualizations, we will give a meaning to the data and make the user understand what this data means. But at the same time, we will have an impact on the user acceptance on these tools. If they like the visualizations, if they understand them, then they will use the tools and they will be motivated to capture more data. Yes, 3 examples quickly. The first one is from Udifit. It's an application where you have a garden, and the more activity you do, physical activity, more sport, the more flowers you have. So this has this persuasive component too. In the center, you can see some histograms, and in the final visualization, it's what we call the mood map app. It's one application that we are developing now in Mirror, and you can express your mood by a bidimensional map of violence and arousal. Here we could have smiles, for example, too. And just to conclude my presentation, so I have shown you a framework for applying quantified self-tools to support reflective learning. This gives us an understanding on how could we design new tools in order to support reflective learning at work. And it has allowed us to have a structured review of this strand of research and detect which areas still are unclear for us and need further research. And our actual work is now designing and implementing new quantified self-tools, and in order to afterwards validate this framework and see how these tools can support reflective learning. And thank you very much, and if you have any questions, it will be a pleasure to answer you. Mm-hmm.
But then the information that's gathered is about cigarette smoking, coffee drinking, physical activity, and all of these things. And I'm wondering what the constraints are. Who gets the information, and does the user have control over that?
Yes, so actually here are 2 different things. So the quantified self-tools are used by many people, and they are aware that this data is being published. And some of them, they have the options in the tools to keep them private too. But what we are aiming to do is to use these principles of these tools and develop new tools which have to deal with the privacy problems at each company where we are going to apply our tools. That's why, for example, using these ideas of quantified self, we have developed this mood map app, and we are going to use it in a big telecommunication company, and then we have to adapt ourselves to their company. So data will remain in the company, and the data set will just be for them, not share with others. So the instances that we will actually use at work will deal with these privacy issues. But the examples I showed you are already there and are just uncontrolled, we could say. But it's the principles of these tools what we are using for new tools. Mm-hmm.
Do you see maybe some kind of hierarchy in your model that you think would be relevant to different kinds of workplaces or different kinds of workplace learning?
So not directly, for example, with context or categorizing at work, but my approach would be to these 3 dimensions to see which tool, so instantiate a tool, for example, say a tool in the tracking part does the work like this, use these means to track. For the recalling and revisiting dimension, makes this approach or this odd approach and how it works. Then we will evaluate several scenarios, but we have not considered to make a big hierarchy about it. Still in the project, we have 5 different contexts, so these will be for sure covered.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Melody Siadati. I'm a PhD student at Simon Fraser University and a research assistant at Athabasca University. I'm going to present our design briefing, which is about LearnBee. It's a tool for it's a social analytics enabled tool for to support self-regulated learning at workplace. This is an outline of my talk, what we will be talking about. So I will first start with the research challenge. Why at all we have started this research? Well, the main purpose and the main objective of this research is to support organizationally embedded personal learning at workplace. And why do we consider it as a research challenge? First of all, learning at workplace faces many different challenges. Some of them are similar to challenges that we face when supporting learning in educational settings. Some of them are really different. The main important ones are that learning at workplace is informal, it's autonomous, and this requires learners to have self-regulatory capabilities. Secondly, workplace learning is contextual. Most of the time, it's on demand. Workers start their learning process when they need to learn something, when they face some problems regarding a project or a task that they are responsible for. And these come from the learning objectives or the goals of their organization, the business plan or the principles or whatever that the organization is pursuing. So this conveys the harmonization of individual and organizational learning goals. Last, not least, workplace learning has a social context. It's not that learning happens in isolation, no. Employees work together, they have colleagues, they work in teams, they work in projects together on a task, on a project. They're responsible for group tasks. And that would mean that a learner has to align with colleagues' goals and activities as well. So all of this being said, we have a pedagogical framework underlying our research. It's based on the knowledge building model by Nonaka. Many of you might be familiar with this model. It's very famous. It's been in use since 1995. It mainly addresses the organizational learning and how the knowledge moves in an organization from within an individual head until to the moment that it becomes public and the learner decides to actually share it with his colleagues. We have used this model, but to address the challenges that I just mentioned in the previous slide, we have extended this model with self-regulatory learning practices to support the concept of aligning to one's learning goals, with the social embeddedness of workplace learning to allow for a learner to align their learning goals with that of other members of the organization, and with the notion of organizational context, because workplace learning, most of all, is contextual. So it would allow for harmonization of individual goals with that of organizational goals. So LearnBee, the tool that we want to introduce in this design briefing. LearnBee stands for learning biases, and biases means learning as a way of life. So via this tool, we are promoting learning as a way of life. So how we can support learning in the daily work activities of learners at their workplace. It's a tool to support self-regulatory practices in intentional and non-formal learning in organizational contexts. And there are many technical challenges here. For example, the most obvious one being that learners and users use many diverse tools. They do their activities in different environments, and to trace and track these activities, to collect them all together and and give a meaning to them and share it, give a shared meaning to it and share it within the organization, we have to use some structure. And for that, we make use of ontologies and data linking. Make use of ontologies for data linking and annotation. Many different features are available in LearnBee. Some of them I'm introducing here. A first group of features are the contextual recommendations, whether this can be recommendations of competences. Competences here represent the organizational goals, what that matters to the organization and the organization wants its employees to have or to achieve. And to achieve those competences, the tool also allows for contextual recommendation of learning paths, learning activities that could be done within those paths, and the knowledge objects that users can use to perform those activities. This set of features support the harmonization aspect of workplace learning. The second set of features, they support the social embeddedness of workplace learning. One of them being the knowledge sharing profiles. I'm going to talk about them a bit later. The other one is a more analytics-based feature. It's the provision of usage information, how the collective, how the social context of the organization has been using the resources available. And the last one is the social wave. It gives updates and information about the resources to the users. I'm going to talk about all these features in the next slides. And the last set of features are the ones that actually address the individual learning aspect of workplace learning. They are more oriented towards supporting the self-regulatory aspects. And they are the progressometers and activity streams, which allow the learner to know how they are progressing toward achieving their learning goals and be aware of different activities that they are doing and how they relate to their different goals and competences included in those goals. So today and the main subject of the conference, of course, is learning analytics. How we consider learning analytics can be beneficial in workplace settings in particular. So we believe that learning analytics can be beneficial to users in every step of their self-regulated learning processes at workplace. For example, it can help them to identify their learning needs and set their learning goals. Also, they can get aware how other employees with similar organizational positions, for example, those who are working on the same projects or who are responsible for the same type of tasks, how they have defined their learning goals. It helps users to monitor their learning progress, also to compare their progress with that of their colleagues. It also helps users to share and document their learning experiences, and not only share it with their colleagues, also see how actively their colleagues are sharing their learning experiences. Also, we just talked how learning analytics is beneficial to an individual, but also it's beneficial to the organizational learning. It supports the harmonization of individual and organizational learning goals. It enables the organization to better know what its employees are working on, how they are defining their learning goals, how they are approaching their learning goals, what learning paths they are creating, they are following to achieve those. So it just gives the organization this big picture, what its structure, what its employees are working on. Furthermore, it enhances the motivation of individuals to take part in sharing activities by letting them know how other people have been making use of their shared learning experiences. For example, if someone knows that their shared document or their shared comment on something has helped someone else to follow that path or better achieve a competence, it would perhaps motivate them to further participate in sharing activities. So, as I just said, LearnBee has many features. In this talk, we just focus on the learning analytics features, those features that in particular support learning analytics. The first one is the one that provides users with some sort of usage information. And by that, we mean that it represents how the collective, how the social context of the organization thinks, works, or treats a certain resource, and this way the user can better make a decision whether to use that resource, whether to choose that competence, to choose that learning path or not. This feature comes in different forms. It comes as statistics, social wave, or it comes in the form of the collective stand. Statistics and social wave are implemented as a set of various visualization charts. And the collective stand is implemented in terms of the keywords, the comments, the tags, and the ratings that users leave for a certain resource. So, for example, this is the screenshot of the main page of the LearnBee tool. You can come for a demo of the tool in the afternoon. I'm just going to briefly show how this usage information look like. For example, consider this is a duty that someone wants to someone is responsible for, and the organization thinks that there are 3 competences that are required for this specific duty, which is ontology development. And the user can see different sort of analytics available for this specific duty. For example, they can see that among these different competences that the user has to achieve to be fully prepared for this duty, the first one has been 5 times added by other people to their learning goals. It has been 3 times commented on, and one person has selected it as their favorite competence, and also the other one. So they can make this decision which competence to start from and which one to choose. Well, for example, consider that they wanted to start with this one. They can also see more information from the collective context of their organization. They can see how many other people are working on this competence, how many people have this competence overdue. They are passed over the deadline that they have set that they want to achieve this competence, but they have not yet, and how many people are actively working on it. Furthermore, they can see how among these people who have this competence overdue, what are the organizational positions of them. So, for example, in the context of this university, 2 of them have been teaching assistants, 1 of them is a senior programmer. So they can get this big picture that who are the people working on this competence, is this easy for them, are they achieving it, are they achieving in time, during the deadline that they have defined for it, etc. Another form of usage information is the social wave. Consider that a person has included this competence in their learning goal, and now they can easily follow this competence and see what other people are doing with this competence. For example, this social wave, as you can see, is related to the competence. You can see how other people have added this to their learning goal, how they have added different learning paths for it, if they are making any updates to it, they are adding new resources for it, and how they are actually working around it. In addition to learning resources, people can also follow other people, like any other social environment, and see what other people are doing. The other analytics feature is the progressometers. So progressometers can both help users both at individual and the collective levels. At the individual level, it helps people to see how they are achieving their defined learning goals and the competences included in those goals. At the collective level, they can also, okay, I'm way over time. They can compare it with how other people are progressing toward their learning goals. So, for example, in this learning path, the person can see since the date at the time that they define their learning path, how they have been progressing toward achieving the completing the learning path, and how other people with different organizational positions have been progressing. Knowledge sharing profiles also support users at individual and also at the collective level. So they can see users how they have been sharing their learning resources and also compare it with other people, the average of sharing activities of other people within their organization. So for example, I can see that I have been very good at sharing, almost very good at sharing my learning paths, not so good at sharing of my learning activities and so on. Last but not least are the motivational messages. These are meant to help users see how other people are opening up their learner models, how they are opening up their personal preferences, and these personal preferences are actually used for those contextual recommendations. So for example, a user can see, can set at their profile that how they want different personal preferences to be used when the system is giving them a recommendation. And these motivational messages just show them and how other people have, just set these properties of their learner model, and those helping the system to giving them a better and more accurate recommendation. So as I described, the main research challenge is we want to see if and to what extent the analytics features in particular, along with other features of LearnB, address the challenges to support workplace learning. Our further development would include that implementation of features that help with documenting and sharing learning experiences, and also support for collaborative learning. And at the moment, we have collected the results of the LearnB being used in 3 different workplace settings. Users have been using it in a 2-month period. We are analyzing this data, and the issues that we identify in this process will definitely help us with our further research. Thank you very much, and please join us for a demo of LearnB in this evening's reception. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Can you hear me?
I do.
So one thing that I think is really important for all of us to do in our work when we're talking about using the learning analytics to support the learning process is to connect how these analytical measures or visualizations we're developing connect to our model of learning. And you talked at the beginning about using Nanaka's sort of knowledge creation model, and 2 aspects of that that I'm interested in how your learning analytics would support are the fact that that model talks a lot about the relationships in the translation between tacit and explicit aspects of knowledge as something that's very non-trivial. And I saw a lot about explicit aspects of knowledge here, but less on the tacit. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece is that's focused very much on the notion of collective creation of knowledge, and I was wondering how that's sort of being served and supported by these analytics.
Very good question. Well, as I talked about the model, it's not explicitly the Nanaka's model. We have extended the model. Maybe I can say that the SRL support that we have added, self-regulatory support that we have added to the model, more addresses the tacit knowledge, how the users actually conduct their learning processes. And for each of these processes, we have defined a set of indicators. So, for example, for planning, like when the user wants to plan their learning goals, we have defined a set of indicators, and each of the functionalities of these visualizations are mapped to one of those indicators. So when we are actually running our evaluations and or just asking users questioning questionnaires, we can see how each of the implemented functionalities has supported the indicators of one of the phases of SRL practices. I don't know if I answered your question. I hope, kind of. Okay.
Yeah, we can talk later.
Okay.
Okay, hi everybody. Welcome back. So we've got a treat for you now. We've got Linda Baer, who is used to be at the Gates Foundation, where she was the Senior Program Officer for Post-Secondary Success, and is now running her own I4 Solutions Consulting. We've got Don Norris, President and Founder of Strategic Initiatives, which is a management consulting firm in Arlington. They specialize in leading and navigating change around enterprise. And we've got Al Essa, who is Director of Innovation and Analytics at Desire to Learn, who are one of our sponsors here at LAK. And what they're going to be doing is talking about the results of quite a large-scale survey of educational institutions. What are they doing with analytics at the moment? What is the gap between their needs and the current available solutions? It's a sort of baseline collective intelligence for us to know where the institutions are at right now, as well as where they should be going. So it's brilliant that we've got them here. I can't wait to hear what they've been doing. They've got lots to share. And I'm just going to hand over to Linda, and it's your show. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We are very pleased to be here at your second annual conference. I love the fact that it's doubled in numbers. Your enthusiasm is just infectious, and great things continue to happen as you continue to discuss. I remember on a very cold day in Banff last year, we were meeting at a post-conference, and all of the people who knew each other by email were sitting in a kind of standing in a circle around the coffee and teapot because they wanted to be face to face. And so that's really the duality of the world that we are living in. We're going to present on some initial preliminary findings from work that included a major survey of institutions and vendors about what's going on in the student success space. And so we're going to talk a little bit from the fact that in the literature now there are a lot of swirling about defining what is analytics and which realm are you in, and particularly this conference is rightly so emphasizing the learning analytics side of the house. We're a little broader than that in terms of where we're going with this, including optimizing student success, whether it's in the classroom or outside the classroom, and anywhere else that learners can continue to improve what they're doing in their learning opportunities. We take optimizing student success from the work of Richard Davenport and others, and so we'll talk a little about that as we go along. But really what we're trying to do is get at the core of what is it to have an organization, have your institutions, have communities, have the idea that you are ready in terms of your data capacity, the data mining, whatever you're doing in terms of accessing data, and that you're able to get it in the hands of those that need it to make the kind of decisions that need to be made in time for students to continue to be successful in what's going on, not so late in the fact that students are lost to us. And so we know that there's a lot of effort on how do we improve student success. So the survey itself, we surveyed leading institutions. We're at 40 plus right now in terms of the number of institutions that have filled out a rather comprehensive survey instrument. And in order to do that, we actually are contacting the institutional members that we think can best help answer the question. It's not a questionnaire that can go to one person and adequately be filled out. Some of you know that because you've participated. And by the way, if you're interested in participating, we are looking for more participants. So jot down a note to us, hand it to us sometime during the conference, and we'll put you on the list. Likewise, we are taking a look at vendors in the field, and right now we're at about 20 plus in terms of vendors who are developing solutions for students. Don started this some time ago. In fact, did some interviewing at one of the EDUCAUSE conferences, annual conferences, and did little video clips of, hello, what are you doing today in terms of analytics? And it will be a nice historic context because what was being done then a couple of years ago is certainly mushroomed in terms of a lot of interest and a lot of enthusiasm that you'll see some of today during the reception. We're going to give you some of the preliminary results, and we'll have this posted both on this website as well as EDUCAUSE's website. And really begin to look at where are the gaps. If you've read the big data report from McKinsey, you know that education doesn't exactly fare on the high list of those ready, able, willing to participate in data. and use it to maximize anything. There's a lot of things that are going on in higher ed and education in general that we need to bridge and strengthen for them to maximize their use, as those of you out here as practitioners know. The next steps will be the development of a toolkit for building organizational capacity for analytics, and there will be chapters and discussion points where this is featuring some of what we're learning through these case studies, as well as next steps. So what would an institution that's just beginning in this field want to do with the kind of resources they have at the moment? What are some of the middle level? What are some of the high flyers doing? And how can we help all to get to a better place to maximize student opportunity? We're going to wrap it up with a little back and forth panel conversation, and so with that we're just going to get started. If you haven't seen the Richard Davenport work on analytics, take a look at it. He's written several books that are really important books. I sometimes carry around my favorite book and then purchase some and share with people, but the analytics, using analytics for competitive advantage, using the idea of where he's taken case studies from business and organization and put them together. We've taken a variation of that on this chart to talk about what would be your goal. And to date, a lot of campuses say we've got data, and they may even say we're awash in data. We got more data and we know what to do with it, or we can't get to it when we need it, and so on and so forth. The goal of this project is to get more data accessible at a better level to make a difference. And so you'll see that the questions go: what are happening, how many, what are the demographics behind it, what's exactly the problem, what actions are needed. If you get above that line, there's an interesting place where you're residing now in terms of better statistical analysis of what you're seeing in terms of patterns and direction, depending on what learner segment you're looking at. What if these trends continue? And a lot of people are ringing the bell saying, we're in trouble, folks, if these trends continue, if the idea of who's getting to high school, and I'm saying high school, those getting to high school and completing, we're in trouble. Those getting into college, we admit them, colleges and universities. We say they're there, ready, and if we say that, we should be supporting and optimizing what they know about it. And John Campbell in the audience has talked about, the obligation of knowing. If we know some of these things that can improve the success of students, what are we doing about it? What's our obligation to do something about it? What will happen next, and that's where we get into the predictive modeling that you've had really rich conversations, particularly today, but ongoing tomorrow and the next. That's the coming together of your research communities of practice telling us what will happen next, because we can predict better and better today. And I really think we should keep in mind what's the very best that can happen. What's the very best we can have happen on behalf of students, learning, our educational environments. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about optimizing student success, and Don's going to take over.
Yeah, and Linda, why don't you just stay here, and we'll tag team the rest of the time, and you can drive. I wanted to thank the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for sponsoring our research through a consulting services contract. This is the typology that emerged. When we got into this and started to talk to the institutions, we had an idea about what we would find in terms of what are institutions doing, literally, to optimize student success. But the answer was far richer than we thought. So what we did as we worked through it, we created this typology. Now, this is not like a Maslow's hierarchy, where you begin at stage one and you work up to actualization at the pinnacle. We found institutions that were doing, many of the 40 leading institutions were active in 5 or 6 or even 7 of these categories, but none of them thought their job was done. Let me walk through and describe to you the typology that we came out of the grounded research with. The first level was managing the student pipeline, dealing with at-risk students. This is the typical strategic enrollment management activities that most institutions do. Many institutions are very sophisticated in this, using a lot of predictive analytics, data mining, and things relating to this, but all relating to recruiting, admitting, and enrolling students, and dealing with at-risk students rather than at-risk behavior. And many institutions, by the way, the overall analytics activity at the enterprise level, at the institutional level, is driven by these strategic enrollment management activities. The second level was eliminating impediments to success. This is like the work that Katie Haycock at the Educational Trust has been supporting, where institutions analyze their bottlenecks, their choke points. They look at the first-year experience. Many institutions have improved retention dramatically by dealing with this. They eliminate bottleneck courses. They create more courses in those bottleneck areas. They deal with the analysis of the policies and the processes dealing with students at risk and otherwise, and improve that throughput. That was the second level and stage. The third level is a very interesting one because it involves predictive analytics in a big way. And this is dynamic query, alert, and intervention, dealing not with at-risk students, but with at-risk behavior. The best examples here are the very well-known and described analytic activities, the predictive analytic activities practiced by the for-profit institutions. And in our sample, we included the University of Phoenix, Capella University, Kaplan, and a number of others that fit this category. And from them saw some very interesting things, where they have taken the embedding of predictive analytics into the academic processes as a very advanced activity, but not just, of course, the for-profits, because the example of the Purdue Signals program, Rio Salado College, and a number of our other examples show that public institutions and private institutions of a variety of kinds are finding ways to embed predictive analytics into their activities. The fourth level is what we called learner relationship management systems and processes. And essentially what we had here was a wide variety of institutional practices trying to deal with the issue of how do we focus on learner behavior and how do we follow learner behavior. Now, we had some institutions like Northeastern University that took Salesforce.com and essentially turned it from a customer relationship system into a learner relationship management system and went at it that way. We had many of the vendors, such as Desire to Learn, who are in the process of migrating their offerings and their student success system that Al will be talking about tomorrow in his session into a system that has learner relationship management characteristics. You have the Sherpa product that was developed at South Orange Community College District that manages the relationship and nudges students in a way to move them forward. So this is another step, the fourth step in the typology. This brings us then to the fifth step, which is why we're all here today, which is personalized learning system environments and learning analytics. Now, this is a very important step because, or level in the typology, because learning analytics really spans institutional or enterprise analytics, what's going on in the institution, and all the other levels up to this point have focused on what's going on in the institution. But learning analytics is the first level we see here in which we really can go within the institution or we can go outside and look at free-range learning. What the students learn on their own. What do they learn at other times that they want to have certified and be brought into a knowledge pathway that they subsequently enter from an institution. So learning analytics is hugely important to the expansion of what's going on in analytics for student success. The sixth level is data mining and big data. Now, obviously, data mining goes on at some of these other levels, at the strategic enrollment management level, at the predictive analytics that are embedded in process. But what we're really talking about here is large-scale data mining activities, many of which can actually span beyond the institution to be multiple institutions. One of the projects that's funded by the Gates Foundation, the Predictive Analytics Reporting Project, involves 6 institutions that are pulling together a federated database with over 800,000 records to demonstrate the concept and to set the stage for a large-scale federated database that can be used for data mining and analytics activities. Obviously, these kinds of analytics can have many, many uses. And finally, the 7th level we mentioned is extending the concept of student success beyond academic success to job success, employment success, life success, and to include employability at work And of course, here you have the capacity of joining together institutional data sets with employment data sets, with government data sets. You know, Monster.com has 110 million resumes and job descriptions on file. Think of the data mining capability when you put together Monster.com, state agencies that are dealing with employment, federal agencies, and institutions. So we looked at our 40 institutions and evaluated them all and captured this on the activities they have going on at this level. And this is part of the data system that's available for our study.
Some of the categories of work on the institutions that related to organizational capacity are listed here, and they aren't of any surprise probably, but if you look at them in an ecosystem way, the idea of what do you build and how do you build it out is important. You've heard about technology audits, you've heard about maybe analytics audits, the idea of assessing where is your system, where is your institution in its capacity to do some of these things. Certainly one of the areas, but not the only area, is technology, infrastructure, tools, applications, solutions. The idea is that doesn't reside by itself, though. It sometimes starts there, but one of the more important things we're finding from the research is the place where institutions come together and work together in teamwork with IT and with IR and with academics and with student success and with the other productivity measures. That's where it starts maximizing and leveraging that optimal place for student success. So technology is a beginning place, certainly. The other place is processes, policies, and practices. We would say one of the major questions should be what policies are enabling you to maximize student success and what things might be in the way. And so, for example, in the state of Minnesota, it was determined that having a more thorough pipeline of K-12 to college university information was important, that we should begin to be able to share the data systems and the data sets so that we could better know where students were prepared or where they needed more assistance. It took about 3 years to get through the state legislature for that, but it was an important first step. So a policy that says, where do you have the records, how comprehensive are they, to whom are they available, and so on, becomes really important. It would be very interesting for you to take a check on what policies are helping to enable student success and what policies, for some reason or other, particularly in the more traditional realm, are getting in the way. And I think all of us still are having a foot in both worlds when you talk about what policies relate to traditional on-site education and what are now applying to online and what applies to hybrid. And really, a lot of people just don't know how to meld these together. The value skills of faculty, staff, students, and alumni, one of the biggest issues and the gaps that need to be addressed has to do with skill sets. And what we heard from some of the campuses was about the time they had somebody all trained up because they kind of grew with their system and they knew what was going on. Probably one of the vendors hired them, and off they went. Or somebody else would hire them because it's such an up-and-coming field. And we don't have very many opportunities to have ready education of the people who are actually working in the field. Where is it? I mean, is it RR? Is it IT? Is it academics? Where is it that it needs to reside? Well, probably across all. And George Siemens certainly has been working with a major online course and moving toward a degree that will help people maybe be certified in analytics. That if we are going to be a knowledge age, a knowledge-based economy, more people need to be better equipped to work in that field. And so that's part of what's going on in that one. The biggest one probably, if you read the big data report and the McKinsey report on high-performing institutions, is the fact of culture and behavior. I've been surveying a small survey in the state of Minnesota of universities, and it is just astounding to have people say, we can't get at the data. We're data deprived. We're data deprived. We really want that data, and we can't get it. And why the 21st century, where we have more data than ever before, people are still saying those kinds of things, really critical. And it's a critical thing to say all of us have to be about this together, and it resides finally with leadership and the skill sets that say this will be important. Purdue, much of what's going on certainly has come from leadership that has said we're going to improve our retention and graduation and you're going to do it by this year. And so there John got his marching orders and off he went. So that's a little of where we are. The universities, we're not going to take a long time on this, but you can hear more about it or get the actual names of who are participating. But you can see that we believed it had to be a wide cross-section of participants so that we can begin to say the for-profits, you've heard, Don has talked about their leading. Well, sometimes those policies and practices and different things, infrastructure, may be at a different level for them because they don't sometimes have some of the barriers or boundaries others might. So you see the list of where we've got players. We are happy to say we're going to be in conversation with Solar so that we can get far broader perspective on this from an international side of things, and that will be happening, conversations tomorrow. Then come the vendors.
Let me say a few words about the vendors. When we started the project, we had a sense that we wanted to capture the business intelligence and ERP vendors, which actually is redundant because there was a spate of consolidations where every ERP vendor figured they had to buy a BI vendor in order to really be fulfilled. So you can see there was a consolidation several years ago. But we also got the LMS providers, some advising and retention providers, and analytics consulting, general advising companies. We got 20. We wanted to start with 20. We knew there were more, but we wanted to get going on the research, and we've completed these to the stage for to be part of our preliminary report, and we're finishing the detailed write-ups here. One of the things Linda mentioned, we have a very detailed questionnaire that we use with the institutions. We also have a detailed questionnaire with the vendors. And we've got all of this information at the Edge of One World database where it can be updated and will be updated and kept fresh so that we can bring these together and actually create a bit of a match-up service. Now, in addition, we are looking at our next 20 vendors, and we have continuing funding with the Gates Foundation to create this toolkit for building organizational capacity for analytics. In that, we will expand the case studies of the institutions, and we will expand this to 40 vendors. And these are the vendors we've included. Now, you see what we've done in this next round. We have added a whole bunch of generalized gen learning, next gen learning, type providers because they are playing a real part in the analytics game too. And I'm making a call to anybody who's here, who's a vendor, who's in this space, who wants to be included, please come up and see us after the presentation. And indeed, if any institution that would like to consider being included, come and talk to us, because we want to make sure that we have the right group of institutions and vendors included. But what we'll be able to do in this data set is to compare what the leading institutions and the vendors have done. Now, let me say, in selecting these two groupings, there was a method to our madness. We wanted to select 40 institutions that had the reputation of doing good things in analytics. And we took institutions that had been selected by Gates for next-gen learning funding. We took our own recommendations from experts in the field, and we also got a selection to cover all types of institutions. From talking to the leading institutions, we wanted to identify what are the leaders doing and what, therefore, is it possible for the industry to aspire to. From the vendors, we wanted to know what they were currently providing and what their plans were, and how much tension is there in the rubber band of pulling analytics forward, and we found that there's a good bit of positive tension. But we also wanted to ask the vendors, what are the other institutions doing? We're talking to the 40 high flyers, but how about the rest? And you're dealing with other institutions. What is the average run-of-the-mill institution doing in terms of their learning capacity, their analytics capacity? So that combination of leading institutions to see what the leading potential was, vendors to find out what their aspirations were, and also to get a sense of what the industry as a whole was doing.
So we came up with some preliminary insights to begin with, and some of it is really probably every institution in some way or another know at least about the terminology. I know in one of the sessions somebody said they knew about if you were asking a faculty member about improving student learning or whatever, that they could that they were for. They were positive about that. If you ask them about learning analytics, sometimes they don't know what that means, and it kind of tells you a little bit about how we're transmitting some of this. But the leading edge institutions are really beginning to show good return on investment because of their student success analytics, and you know, Purdue is certainly a leader in that, but by and large you end up seeing really major results because of beginning to take these tool sets seriously and instituting across the board. The more students, the better in terms of this. We're developing good case studies across the board, but a lot of institutions are interested about hearing about how others are doing so that they can learn from them. There are different patterns for different institutions, certainly, often because of how much can be invested or what has been traditionally already invested or what legacy system might have already been in place, and so on. Leadership is absolutely critical, and we're still trying to figure out ways with EDUCAUSE and ask you and others about how can we get more to the leadership for them to understand better what was going on. I remember an article not too long ago that said, you know, presidents, you have to know about IT. You can't just leave it to your IT folks. And I think we're in that same kind of place now. You have to understand it enough to say we're going to improve, and we know certain tool sets are going to help us improve. And it's not just presidents. You know, it can be chancellors, it can be systems, it can be states, it can be federal government in terms of what kind of leadership is there to really say we can do better and we must. There are a lot of different examples, and finally a wide variety of build, buy, and mashups, and that's some of what you're talking about here when you're talking in your presentations about how have you put things together, and the build, buy, mashup. One of the things we heard, because we hosted two analytics events, national analytics events in Minnesota a couple of years ago, and one of the things we heard that seemed to be uppermost in people's minds is we may have data sets over here, but there are data sets here, and there are data sets here, and there are data set here, and our biggest issue is they're not talking to one another, and we can't figure out how to make that work. You know, learning management systems might not talk to student engagement systems, might not talk to something else. And so those were some of the issues we heard, and we heard some insights from vendors as well.
There's a tremendously expanded emphasis in analytics among the vendors. If you went to the EDUCAUSE conference 2 years ago, analytics was just emerging as an important issue. This past year, in October, November, it was a bigger issue. It'll be huge when we have the EDUCAUSE meeting this year. There are expanding student success solutions from the BI, ERP, LMS vendors. They're working hard on this. They've caught on to the notion that student success is very important. There are all sorts of new vendors in many of these categories. Retention and student success vendors like Starfish Retention Solutions that is able to demonstrate very substantial outcomes with the institutions they're working with. Personalized learning, K through 12 vendors that are moving up in the higher ed workforce learning. One of the big pieces of news is that cloud-based applications are, as they relate to analytics, are starting to demonstrate the cloud's potential to lend vendor infrastructures, solutions, processes, cross-sector linkages, and know-how. Vendors like Pearson eCollege have hundreds of institutions in the cloud with their LMS and analytics offerings and are able to do comparative analytics across those institutions because they have the same interoperability, they have the same capacity, and they've bunched together the talent to do it. So there are some and most of the other vendors are moving to cloud-based solutions. So what we really have some emerging demonstrations that the cloud has tremendous potential in this area. And there are very strong marketplace incentives for continuing vendor innovations, expansion into next-gen learning, and expanding the consulting and support services they can provide to institutions.
Well, and finally, in terms of some of the preliminary insights we have from the institutions, many of the institutional leaders overestimate their data. Is that a surprise? We're overestimating. Of course we're doing well. A colleague and I did a survey once about partnering in the learning market space, and we did some case studies on the Learning Anytime, Anyplace partnerships that came out of FIPSE, Funds for Improvement of Post-Secondary Education. And one president said, well, you have to be brutally honest. If you're in a consortium with other presidents, you have to be willing to put up front that we failed or we didn't get it quite done. I don't know a president today that's really willing to do that. So anyway, sometimes they overestimate. And so we're working on some of the development of something that might look more like an analytics IQ. What do you know? How do you know it? What else can you learn more about? We need affordable solutions. This can't be left to just the ones that can afford to keep building out. And those that have built out have to understand that the capacity to use what's there has to continue to move throughout the institution, has to get in the hands of those that can make the difference with students, including students themselves. More and more demand on accountability will continue to spread, but we need to make sure we've got the quality we need, the usability we need, the resources to sustain what's going on here. And finally, as we said before, the build, buy, mashup, the idea of institutional-based work, a lot of legacy tools started up or tools that people developed with the free-range learning that's now going to come together and really develop some really exciting things in the marketplace.
Well, I bring glad tidings for people who are in the analytics business like us. There's a worldwide talent gap in analytics. All of the reports that have been done, the recent McKinsey Global report on data, big data, pointed this out. And in higher education, the talent gap is huge. So the lack of analytics expertise and experience in our industry, difficulties in making hires with people who have commercial predictive analytics experience, and then, as Linda said, having them hired away by commercial vendors who might be able to pay them twice the salary that an institution can. This is all part of the problem. There's a pervasive need for professional development at all levels, including the need for free-range personal capacity building for individuals, for learners who are trying to figure out how they're going to engage on their own learning activities in a world that's being opened up, where analytics are going to open up the availability and knowledge of what learners can learn for themselves in conjunction with other resources. There will be a continuing need for continuing enhancements in tools, applications, solutions, and services. The reason that leaders think they're doing better than they really are is that the bar has been raised. 3 years ago, 5 years ago, analytics meant having an ERP system and a report writer. And now things have changed considerably, and the perceptions of the leadership have not kept the pace in many cases. And finally, there's a tremendous need for consulting, know-how sharing, institutional capacity augmentation. And what we see developing, I described Pearson College, the efforts of other vendors to build online activities, the federated data activities like in the PAR project. Most of us, when you look at this extrapolated several years in the future, we can see the emergence of constellations of collaborators, vendor communities, federated solutions that find ways to collaborate and make sure that we're not just seeking individual institutional solutions to analytics activities.
Well, we've got some next steps, and that can include you. We'd like any of you that might be interested in being part of this survey, or as we have discussed, the SOLAR will be discussing the use of this survey with maybe some variations for their specific needs. So we're going to continue to build the case studies and extend the interviews. We are developing some frequently asked questions. We'll show some of that as we go along. We're hoping to develop what's called a match-up service. Institutions like you that are trying to solve these kinds of issues related to your student population or student learner segments are using solutions like this, and they're getting this kind of result from it. Those kinds of connected pieces are what we'll be looking at. We said we're going to continue to develop the toolkit. We're working with EDUCAUSE as they have featured analytics, their year of data analytics, YODA, for those of YODA.
Excellent.
And finally, just accelerate more of this understanding of how do you better develop organizational capacity, because that's going to be really the name of the game. We do have a few questions about match-up service, but we want to turn to Al and have him talk a little bit from the perspective of the vendor community in relation to not only the survey itself, but where he sees things going among many of his clients.
Well, thank you. It's late in the day, so I thought I'd engage in some gossip. And I'm not going to talk about what we're doing, but what our observations are about our clients and what they're doing and where they're going. Particularly, if we think of analytics as strategic, I'll just kind of throw out some assumptions that analytics is strategic and there will be winners and losers. So if we were to engage in handicapping which institutions will succeed with analytics and who will lose out. And this relates to capacity. So as a vendor, we want to make sure that we succeed, but it's a partnership. If organizations don't have the capacity for analytics, we will not succeed. So when we think about capacity for analytics, we think of it along three dimensions. Dimension one is technology, dimension two is culture, and dimension three is business. So let me just quickly make a point along each dimension. So on the technology side, what we see are the institutions that we think are going to do well. Infrastructure and IT. Most of my career, I've been toiling in the coal mines of IT. It's a dirty business. It's hard. You got to shovel a lot of stuff. And that complexity is not going away. So one characteristic, I think, of winners in the analytics space will be the capacity of your IT environment to deal with complexity. That's not going to go away. You've gotten a flavor of all the issues. You have to pull in data from various sources. You have to have big data, data warehousing, predictive modeling, blah, blah, blah. Okay? A lot of complexity. So the capacity of your IT department and the technology side is something to watch for. On the culture side, the winners that we see are traditional education. They tends very much to work in silos. You've got the academic side, student services, institutional research, assessment, and the ones who are really charging ahead more quickly than others are bringing everyone at the institution at the table and viewing analytics in a very systematic and coherent way. The third, on the business side, there's this saying by Samuel Johnson, the prospects of an imminent hanging concentrates the mind. The for-profits really get it. The nonprofits still, should we, would we, could we, can we? The idea of urgency around analytics, we see it when we deal with our for-profits. Why? Because student success, lost seat, lost revenue. It just comes down to that. So I think there's something really to be learned from the for-profits on the thinking of education as a business. That's really an alien concept. Still, we're dragging our feet. So to summarize, I think building the capacity for analytics, it's not just about technology, but the culture side, bringing everyone to the table, making sure that the governance part of analytics is successful at your institution, and then just what for-profits really see analytics as building capacity in that front as a matter of urgency. It's survival in the game. So I'll stop there.
Let me comment on the urgency item. When we looked at these seven layers, or this typology of seven things, it was like the layers of an onion, and you peel away each one. Each one of those has the capacity to add several percentage points to your institution's retention. It's amazing how much difference the produced signals program has made and similar programs have made simply by paying attention and putting in place systematic and systemic ways of dealing and paying attention to retention and treating it with some urgency. These efforts, we'll look at these efforts 3 and 5 years from now and chuckle at how primitive they seem given the advances that are going to happen in predictive analytics and learning analytics over the next 3 to 5 years. But simply by paying attention and treating it as a matter of urgency, institutions can dramatically improve retention and student success. And this is only the beginning, because as we hone our skills and get into the personalized learning side and begin to deal with that, the potential is huge. And it's and when you see institutions that have dramatically improved these things in a year, or an outfit like Starfish that can go in and by having the know-how to know what things to focus on and how an institution, simply by directing its energies, can improve retention by 5 percentage points in a year. That suggests how serious this is. Linda?
So that's a bit of where our story is right now. We're in the midst of more analysis, more determination of how to move some of this information out, where can it make a difference, how to expand the case studies that we already have to more so that it can enrich and strengthen what we know. We talked about a matchup tool, and the questions are up there to just show you a few things that people might want to know so that when they go into this, they go in with a stronger ability than where they were if they were just going in blind. And so with that, I think we're going to open it up and see what questions you might have, how we might be able to expand what we're doing, if this is on point in terms of some of the things you're doing, and go from there. So there we are.
Hi. Just curious, I could see that this is all going to take senior leadership support inside the institution. Yeah. To what extent can you describe the carrots and or sticks senior leadership is using to promote retention, for example, as a serious problem to address to their faculty?
Well, it's an outstanding question, and it's, kind of makes me squirm a little bit because of the fact that different leaders will go about it in different ways. And some will say, come, let us reason together. What's a good plan? Can we get it together? Not taking 5 years to get to a big plan, but can we put it together piece by piece? ASCU just hosted, for example, a webinar on transforming higher education, and they had several institutions represented that were doing key things. Now, some of them were relatively new campuses that had been established with the idea that they could be more innovative than those long-standing campuses. They are looking at things like full-year offerings so that you don't have a summer, that you're in a 12-month cycle, and it just is built in that that's what you do. And that retention ends up being a piece of how you review how faculty are doing. Now, it's a little bit of what you're seeing with No Child Left Behind with K-12 is that schools and ultimately faculty, teachers, are being assessed by how successful their students are. I could speak, and maybe John could do better with it in terms of when his president said, we're going to improve retention, what kind of steps did she take to ensure that that might happen? Not to put you on the spot or anything, John. But depending on which state you're talking about, sometimes the state boards themselves are more involved in this. Tennessee has been a leader. Missouri has had more of that history of data and the importance of data, and therefore the rewarding of event. They will show during faculty development days full assessment opportunities and more training so that people can understand better what's going on. I think you see some of that in more of the online education. You could also say that for the for-profits, and just take a look, what I would say is go home, if you're not a for-profit, go home and find one that you could partner with for a little bit or have a little conversation with them, because they don't have some of the barriers. They can say, Capella can say, we're going to do this in class assessment, and we're going to know where students are during each week, and when we see something that's not working, we're going to intervene and do something about it. So I didn't go honing right in on that. And John, I don't know if you want to say anything more about what incentives or carrots your president did, but I know that part of your ongoing work has been supported because you've got a leader that's interested in seeing improvement in retention.
Well, I think, can everyone hear me? That's even better. And it even works. So in terms of administrative incentives, I think one of the other keys is facilitating the staff on campuses to actually be able to innovate. Yeah. And in a number of the sessions that we talked about, one of the biggest hurdles for a number of people in terms of innovation is just getting access to the data. I see a lot of people shaking their heads. And so it's amazing about what you can do when you get into an environment where you have access to the data, where you can explore and enter into a dialogue. So in terms of building the capacity and looking at the culture of the institution, I think part of it is just having a culture that provides for this type of innovation.
So when a leader says innovation is important, so even though there are budget cuts happening all around you, innovation pools or innovation discussions and innovation support would still be there, for example. Another example has to do with the fact that people go across the campus in sharing what those great practices are, so that you have faculty forums and begin to develop more of a culture that these are good things that are going on and you too can improve student behavior. I think another thing that's going to be pushing this is maybe more of the stick than the carrot is the high issue of student debt. And student debt load, particularly when it begins to relate to students who don't complete on top of everything else. And so there's going to be more of an accounting for how are students doing and are they being retained when public money and federal money and all of the kinds of resources are going toward trying to support students. So anyway, each of you probably have a little story about that. Please.
Yes, I'm particularly interested in whether you found any patterns in the alignment of the kinds of data that the for-profits are collecting relative to the nonprofits to try to shed light more directly on things like retention or the impacts of particular sacred cows, if you will. And I'll give you an example. We often hear, particularly research institutions and the presidents and VCs thereof, extol how important their research institution is at attracting and retaining students. And yet, when pressed, it's often difficult for them to articulate that into anything that's very direct and, in fact, actionable. That shows how the research money and measured in dollars for research grants acquired has particularly relevant impact to second-year chemistry undergraduate courses.
Well, we were fortunate to have the participation of a good number of the for-profits, and they're not all alike by any stretch of the imagination, except in their dedication to using analytics strategically from a business point of view and from a learning point of view. They all use analytics from day one or before to find out when students are demonstrating at-risk behavior, and can act within hours and days of a student starting their online journey to find out when they're in trouble based on their behaviors in comparison with behaviors in the past. So you can say consistently they all do that, but they all have very different approaches. Capella is focusing on their competency model, and they have analytics embedded in that in very impressive ways. The University of Phoenix is undergoing a major redesign activity now to move into a world where they're able to look at personalization and the outcomes of personalized learning on outcomes, on student success, and to embed that in their processes. This notion of embedding predictive analytics in academic and administrative processes is something that is very much part of their DNA.
And we do have a representative here in case you might want to say something, but if you can think about that. I don't want to put people on the spot. But the issue also has to do with not just gathering the data, but having the people behind the data understanding what do we do with it once we see these things. And so it's part of the talent base. I'm hoping that might be what you would reinforce here, but that once you have the data, you are disseminating and discussing it, and you have intervention points. One of my big fears was, okay, well, we'll go and invest in a lot of data analytics, but then we won't put the resources behind what are the intervention tools that you should map to, and how will you make sure there are multiple ways students can reach the intervention so that they can improve what they're doing. Yeah. And many people say, keep it simple. I mean, improve your gateway courses so more people get through. Improve the fact that people are able to get help, be assessed for the help they need, and make sure that they do something about it. I mean, Virginia Polytechnic Institute's Math Emporium, a long-standing opportunity that showed it could make a big difference for students. But would you like to say something? University of Phoenix here, Mike is here, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
It's a spot he likes to be on.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things we're doing. I'm actually presenting Wednesday morning in the predictive analytics track. I'm going to share a model that we have working with. And yeah, it's definitely, I like what you said about, we're looking at student success. The comment you made about, for for-profits, lost seat equals lost revenue, I'm not a fan of that. I mean, whether you think that's true or not, I think that really is saying, oh, geez, we just care about getting them through one more class and getting X more dollars out of them, and that's not the case. I mean, we're really focusing on student success and student learning just as much as the next institution. So, if you talk about those, what are those outcomes we're trying to work on, it really is about student success and student learning. So I think it's, again, everyone's trying to solve the same problems.
I would like to comment on just kind of give a specific example of the type of data that for-profits are interested in and nonprofits are not as interested in. We consistently hear from the for-profits, we want to see data and analytics around faculty engagement, faculty participation, faculty response times. And that is tied to student success. I'll just make the comment about nonprofits. It's not so much that they're not asking about data about faculty. It's off the table. We can't even talk about it. And to me, that's disturbing, because when you just sort of think about faculty's motivation to teach, are they participating, are they responsive? These are, at least prima facie, contributing factors to student success. So we see far more openness from the for-profit sector on looking at faculty data, how they're engaged. So we talk a lot about student engagement, student participation, but what about the faculty data?
Thank you. And I think that's an important piece, because if you've done any of the research on the NESE, the National Survey for Student Engagement, or SESI, the Community College Survey, you find that the research shows those that had a sense of urgency and those that had sort of an unrelenting culture or belief that they could do better. They could be some of the leading ones and doing the best they can be doing, but they had a sense that we can always learn more about our students and we can always do better.
I just wanted to add to that. I mean, I work at a nonprofit institution, and with the decline of federal dollars and state dollars, there's no question that we're also looking at every seat as being, absolutely important to our college. Every student we lose is money, is revenue we lose. So I don't think that was a particular stab at for-profits at all. I was actually curious. All of this that I heard about, I didn't hear anything about Achieving the Dream, which is a data-driven movement in community colleges, and I was just curious if you had any commentary. Is there a reason we haven't heard anything about that as part of this?
Good question. It isn't that they're not there by intention, and some of the schools that have been surveyed are actually Achieving the Dream colleges. So a good point to say, when you get an opportunity like Lumina supporting and then Gates also supporting Achieving the Dream colleges, it was to say, let's be very intentional about the data and the definition of the data, the quality of the data, and the use of the data, and then let's move forward. And so one of the things that happened there was certainly the Community College Research Center being front and center as the IR function, sort of an outsourced IR function for these schools. But they did learn, they were trained, and they were continued to have professional development in what it was to have the right kind of data and using the data to improve. So that's a good point. Thank you. Any Achieving the Dream colleges out there by chance? Well, would you like to make some comments? Okay, yeah. But it does give a template, and sometimes even when you haven't been funded, and we saw some of the schools that didn't get Achieving the Dream status, like in Ohio, and they decided they were going to use the template anyway because it was a really good template, or some of them that were in the Completion by Design out of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that might not have made the cut, but decided, boy, you know, that's a pathway pattern that really can work, and we're going to put some resource behind it. But what really happened was it was infusing into the data capacity, the IR capacity, because what we found for community colleges, for example, is sometimes their average IR people, they might have 1.5 institutional research people. Well, that's an average. And so the issue is saying you can't do data without data people or people that understand the data. You have 7.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And this is what I'm talking about in terms of collaborations. We have to find ways to get to constellations of institutions or groups working together to be able to get beyond that trap of having 1.25 FTE people to do the job of 5. And there are mechanisms for that. I'm very confident that we're going to find ways to span that, but it's not going to be done by each institution standing on its own bottom, I don't think.
Well, and I almost wonder in the evolution of this, if we call it evolution, you know, IT was not IT forever. There was a place when suddenly technology became what it is and what it continues to evolve to be. And we might learn a little bit of what happened when suddenly that became interesting, important, critical, urgent, and how it's grown to be what it is. And I think we're going to have a comparable sort of pathway of what's going to happen with institutional research, IT combination, the partnering across an institution, and that may be something to look at some of the historical data on how IT formed and became what it was.
Just wondering, listening to the conversation, if there's a danger of it being oversold, especially to senior managers, because, and I think there's real benefits, and some of the things I've seen in the workshop yesterday and today are quite amazing, and I think that will be very important to move forward on. But I was just making a little bit of a list, and I was at the first International Conference on Learning Management Systems in 1989, and I'm sure we're going to have the first perfect LMS come out next year. I think web learning was 1994, e-learning was 2000, I think ERP was about 2005. So just wonder if you have any comments about overselling or maybe as part of a bigger continuing improvement.
I'll say one thing very quickly is that most institutions, if they make an intelligent investment in student success, in analytics supporting student success, it will pay for itself. The ROI on student success, you almost can't argue about it. And Linda's run the numbers at institutions, and Al's done the same. And I'm not saying that you can't fail to get an ROI. There are bad investments to make, but literally, there are so many examples out there now that institutions that are making the investment and it's paying for itself immediately, and then continuing to do so if you can hold those retentions. So this is something that and this is why you start intelligently, go after the low-hanging fruit, pick something you know is going to be demonstrable and have an ROI, and then move from there. And so that you take prisoners along the way, as we say in the consulting business, by demonstrating the capacity to do it. And that's the way to avoid the overpromising.
Yeah, I have a quick comment on that one. That's really a great point. We, as vendors, we tend to oversell analytics, and then when you say clients, when they come in, they think, okay, we just bought analytics solution, so this is going to solve everything. And then we're in this huge cycle of disappointment and recrimination. So one of the things that we're now realizing is each institution is in a different place and it has a different set of needs with analytics. So part of the onboarding process, from a vendor point of view is let's find out what the sweet spot is. What are some small things that you can get started with? Put together a 3-month plan, 6-month plan, a year plan. But you're absolutely right. If an institution comes in and thinks that, okay, we have analytics, we have everything in place, and we're going to get instant effect, it doesn't happen that way. So just selecting, and every institution, it's different, different entry points.
One question is, what do you know, if anything, from this survey about how students feel about these? So this is institutions tooling up big time, notionally in the students' interests to get them through. But do you have any sense of how it feels at the end, at the student end?
Sorry, can I just say that was a question I was going to ask about the stakeholders, because I'm quite concerned, I would like to know more about the students as the key stakeholders, because I think it's great the work you're doing with institutions and vendors, but it seems to be a big gap about the students, and this is what this is about. So I'd just like to kind of...
Yeah. I'm asking that because I saw your tweet, Sheila.
Well, again, I will point to John Campbell just because I know his work, but you have students that are integrated into what the Signal Project is about to the point where they pretty well identify themselves. I'm a yellow, or I'm a, but it is important, and it is a piece we need to figure out how to get a handle on. But you've used students in focus groups from the beginning. Is that correct?
So generally in our work, the students aren't, I guess at first I would kind of twist it around. If analytics is about also informing the students, which is part of our project, is to give the students the same data that the faculty are getting in terms of where they are, whether they're at risk or not. The students have responded extremely positively to that. But they're part of the project. They're not, it's not a separate analytics solution that produces a list and something may happen after it. They get to see the results. So I think that's part of what we need to do as a community, is try to provide at least some of that transparency of how the data is being used so that they can benefit as well as the institutions and the faculty can benefit.
When you look at the typology of all the different analytics things, and the first couple of this, the pipeline, the strategic enrollment management, recruiting a student class that's going to succeed, and for those students at risk, providing mechanisms for them to succeed. Institutions that do that, and the students know it, they like that. The second level is eliminating bottleneck courses, improving the first-year experience, making sure students can get the courses they need to graduate on time. Those are all things that students can be actively involved in, and in many of the processes they are. You go right down the list, and this is all about improving the capacity of the students to succeed and achieve their learning objectives on time, and to the extent that they can be involved in that process, more is the better.
I'm going to draw time at that point. I mean, there's such interest in this, and from my perspective, this panel has encapsulated, exactly part of what makes LAK. Okay, we've got lots of guys who do good tech here. We've got educators interested in what's coming. This is saying the system is big and complex. There's some really interesting organizational change issues for LAK to wrestle with as well. And I want to thank you for pulling this panel together. Can we just thank them? This is great. And right now we've got a 20-minute break till 5, and then we're going to have our reception. And those of you who are bringing demos in, this is going to be a sort of ad hoc, pretty informal demos going on. People are just going to grab a table, set up their demo, so you can wander around and see firsthand some of this stuff and talk to the people who are building the next generation things that these guys are going to be talking about, I guess. So we're going to break now. But one final announcement is that I've got a very special award to make for tweeting a photo of Superman next to Shane Dawson, and it being remarkably hard to tell the difference between the two of them. I'd like to award a special solar t-shirt to Sheila McNeil. Come and get your t-shirt. Yeah. This could be you tomorrow.